but I struggle at thinking that there may be things that God is utilizing that are for my benefit, which are amazingly difficult, that there might be enemies of my own that may be out there working with intentions to harm me, and I then have to sit and believe that although there is harm happening now, that God has good for me later. I don't know about you, but I struggle to think that the God may be working through some of my enemies. Genesis 50, starting at verse 18, and it reads, "Then his brothers came and threw themselves down before Joseph. 'Look, we are your slaves,' they said. But Joseph replied, 'Don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good.'" I'll read that again. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many." Joseph reminds us that although we go through some things, we may not fully understand them until the end. Joseph now reviewing everything that he's been through. And it's 20 plus years since the last time he saw his brothers. Decades, almost 30 years, depending on where they come back. For him now to stand before them and say, "It's not your fault. I hold no harm. You intended to hurt me." I love the way the scripture has it. We kind of miss it in the translation, right? But it's meant to be this parody between the two statements, that this conjunction literally shows a direction moving one way and one moving the other way. You had thoughts and intentions, ways that were moving towards evil. Your desire was for my demise. Everything you did was to break me down. All that you wanted was to know that I didn't make it. Everything about our relationship was moved away and you stomped it under your feet. And that is the realization of where you were and what you did. But we have a conjunction type of God. But that changes everything that comes before it. But it did not matter what your intentions were. But it did not matter how much you disliked me. But it did not matter what you tried to do to me. But it did not matter how much I went through, because I have a God that is even bigger than your intentions. I think you need to hear it. I think you need to hear it. He's writing so that there are people out there that can recognize that you may not always understand how God works, but you always ought to know that God is working. You may not always see God working, but you ought to know God is working. That it may look terrible right now. You may be in darkness right now. You may be in pits and slavery and oppression right now. You may go through prison right now. But my God. In moments where we think that human ingenuity and human power are at their best, when we recognize that we're not in bad positions, we can sometimes be overtaken at the power of other people. We start looking at the power of governments and rich people, and we think that it is their way and only their way. But I want you to know that you serve a God that's even bigger than that, and that your God is so good that he can write a script to make sure that even the evil intentions of the world all around you, even what the enemy meant to harm you, God is able to write into your life as a blessing. He says, but God took the curveball and flung it back around. But God used the slavery to make in me something I wouldn't have had. But God took Potiphar lying on me to position me next to a cupbearer. But God put me in a prison so that I can get to the ear of Pharaoh. But God stepped me up in front of Pharaoh, cleaned me up so I can tell him something. But God made sure that when he heard it, he was able to see that I needed not to be where I was, but where I should have been in the first. I had a God. He says, you intended evil, but God intended good.
We adore and magnify your name.